Alrighty, so today we will be discussing, I think we have half an hour carved out, probably we'll get out a little sooner depending on if there's questions or not, but we will be focusing on the new Cvent reporting. And I know I have portals listed up here as well. While we will touch on them lightly today, we do have a session devoted to them next Monday, the 28th, I believe at 2. More focused on that. So if it does pique your interest today, I highly encourage you to attend that session or get the recording after. And of course, these two sessions are being hosted in light of the fact that the old reporting or legacy reporting has been being phased out. And so we are right on the cusp of approaching that June 30th deadline where that legacy reporting and parked report groups associated to it will no longer be available. We actually did have a discussion with our success manager at Cvent earlier today, and I believe they indicated that in the last month or so, 90% of reports have been starting to be made in that new reporting interface, where only 10% people seem to be holding on to these legacy reports a little bit. So really awesome to see that adoption already. So one of the things about reports, and this was true of the old reporting interface as well, but to be honest with you, it's not an area I dove in great depths previously. And so during this transition, I noticed some things that I'll point out throughout here, some tips that I wasn't necessarily aware of. And some of them existed in the old reporting environment. Some of them are just newer features within the new reporting that seem to be useful. With that, choosing a report type is really crucial first step in capturing the correct information. And so I actually had an example of this where you all who host paid events are well aware that we have our treasury team who needs to allocate money. Everything that comes in from all of our users comes into one account, and they have to allocate it to different speed types, and they leverage these same reports that you all use. So in the midst of me trying to migrate those reports, I came upon a point where I chose the wrong report type, and oh buddy, I messed around with that report so much for hours, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And at the end of the day, I started at the wrong place. So I was not going to end up where I needed to. So Cvent Help and Support saved me there. So with that, I do want to highlight that some of the most popular reports I think I've seen used. First one, of course, is a registrant detail report that really just pulls all of your registrants along with any questions, any custom questions that you might have had asked in your particular event. So I was talking to Jennifer Mortensen, the program director, the other day, and we believe that in Classic, this was actually called registrant ad hoc report, which this seems to be giving us the same information, but it was named slightly different. We also seem to think that this report wasn't available until the last month or so. And that came from a user struggling to find it as well. So we're happy to see that that's in our account. And I'll show that in a second. Another popular report that I think is less thought of is an email summary report. So you have the functionality to send follow-up emails outside of post-registration emails via Cvent. And so some of those messages like a know before you go, that's sent out the day before or the week before, check what those open rates are. If nobody opened it, you might have a lot of confusion the day of your event. It might warrant you sending another follow-up communication 5 minutes before the event, if it's a login link or something like that, depending on what those open rates were. I won't go too far into this one, but what I was alluding to earlier, event transactions, that's a report that our treasury team uses that I could imagine some folks who also have paid events. There's about a 2-week delay in when that money is going to end up in your account from when a constituent might have paid for that registrant. So if you're interested in what money you're going to expect to receive down the road, event transaction reports are also very useful. And again, exactly what our treasury team is using. I am going to go ahead and log into Cvent just to show you where one navigating to that new reporting interface that luckily they've kept almost exactly the same, or at least in the same location. And I'm actually going to go to a previous event that our office hosted, so that if I do run the report, there will be a little bit of data populated in there. So once you open up your event, and we'll see in the far right, we do have this reporting, and in the larger navigation that it displays, we always want to be in that far left column and simply called reports. You might see if you have saved legacy reports or the old reports, you could see legacy reports in here for the next week or whatever. But after, again, that June 30th, that's going to go away. But for most of us, all we're seeing under that reporting tab is reports, which will bring you to the new reporting interface. And it does just look like got a little facelift from what they had last time, but again, very similar functionality. So I highlighted one of the common reports that they have listed under here, being this registrant. Again, something that I think was added to our account in the last month or so. We had someone reach out, I believe it was in May, and was struggling to find this. But I think the most popular report. I also mentioned looking at the email summary, communication, if you want to see what those open rates are. You could even look at email details if you really want to see who is opening what messages, but that's been a bit too granular for our purposes anyway. And then I also mentioned that transaction report. And you can absolutely scroll through all of these options, but there is that search function up here that I definitely use pretty frequently. So the next part that we're going to look at in an actual report is what's labeled as the report data settings that you have to set up whenever you run one of these reports. And so there's a selection criteria component. And so we'll go ahead and look at this in a minute, but it's essentially a way to filter your data or look at more of a subset of it if you want to get more granular. And we also have fields in there. So there's a lot of different fields that are available within any single report. I would probably argue hundreds, although I have not counted any. And you can imagine nobody would want that many fields in any average report. So having that opportunity to show what you want, what you don't want, you've got that full control there. So I'm going to pop into Cvent, and with this example, I will be working with this registrant reports, and you can actually underneath registrants, there's other types of reports. And so I have been gravitating towards this registrant details one. So you can just go ahead and run it, which obviously is a bit more in your face there. But what I do like to do is use this drop-down arrow instead and indicate that I want to edit the report before I run it. Either option is fine, but based on what I want to show you today. So as I indicated under that report data settings, you have this selection criteria. And depending on what type of report you ran, this criteria is kind of set to default. So if you do want to, I don't think this is a particularly good example that you'd only want to look at invitees versus guests. I think you'd always want all. But my comment there being, this is set to stay. You can't change this. If you wanted to look at people who only registered during a certain time frame, that's something that you could add there. You also have the ability to add advanced criteria if you are wanting to only, again, look at some subset of this overall event data. You could go ahead and apply this criteria here, this advanced criteria. But for this particular use case, me trying to just pull all the registrants from this event, this advanced criteria is unnecessary. So I won't do it for this example, but did want to mention it. You do get limited up to 5 levels of criteria, and do be aware of that all or any criteria. If anybody has more detailed questions around that, I'm happy to dive into it, but we'll try to keep it simple today. So I'm going to go ahead and trash that. So the next tab that we have here are the fields. And the area that I said where you could potentially add hundreds of columns to this report, which we probably don't want to do. And there are certain fields on here already selected by default, again, based off what report you selected. And so there is a handy little checkbox up here that you can only show selected fields, just if you want to see what is showing. So I'll often do that, and then you're like, oh, I don't want work address. I don't care what that is. I don't want work city, work country, work phone. So you can go ahead and uncheck certain items on here. But I will go ahead and uncheck that so that I can see all the fields. And one thing that I think people a lot, if you asked a particular question in your form, I believe in ours, we asked for like, what are your preferred pronouns? And that falls under custom contact field. So you can either search for that field and let's get it added to this report. Or you could go ahead and display this custom contact field options. And so what you have in your form will be here, but do note other custom contact fields that are not in your form are listed out here. So in my opinion, it can be a little difficult to find what's in your form here. I prefer to just search for it. But with that, I will go ahead and I'm going to uncheck this one for now and just go ahead and run this report. And while that's doing it, we'll see in a minute how you will have actions once this report runs. And first tip always is just go ahead and save this report. It's rare that I find somebody actually only needs a report once. And you already just did all this work. Why not take the 2 seconds to save it, even if you don't come back to it? It just tends to serve me better long term. And the other tip, or why it's a tip, and especially within Siva, is because when you clone an event, if there is a saved report associated to that event, it'll automatically be cloned into the next event. So there is a bit of efficiency there. When you create these reports, you are the only one who has access to them, but there are cases, very legitimate ones, where you would want your colleague to see it. Why should they have to log in and go create that very similar report? So you're welcome to share with fellow users, but do note this is not the same as what we reference as portal users, trying to get other people who do not have a real eComm license or a Cvent license access to these reports. We have a functionality there. It does exist, but that is something that your eComm specialist has to help you with. So separate from sharing visibility with an actual fellow user. And then of course, as most of us use it, that lovely export function that we'll see up in that actions as well. So pivoting back to that report, and this is something that is new with the new reporting that we didn't see in the old reporting, that depending on the report, there are some of these I'm going to use the wrong term. I don't know what the term they use, but they're charts essentially displaying some of this data. So those might be of use to you. You're welcome to look at them. If you don't like them, you're also welcome to just go ahead and delete them or remove them rather. But underneath that, what we're expecting is that list of registrants that you can preview in this window. So as I mentioned earlier, up here at Actions, we would encourage you to just go ahead and save as. Name it as you wish. Description is not required, but highly encouraged. And you should be able to have that visibility open to other users if necessary. And also that export function if you are trying to go ahead and export this information. I do want to highlight up here in the right corner of this particular chart. When you hover it, you'll notice that there is an edit option. And this tripped me up a lot. I was trying to rearrange how these columns displayed, that I just wanted email address, let's say, to be in the first column. And it drove me a little crazy, but it is kind of hidden in those ellipses and then the edit. And the preview pane that displays on that right-hand side, you do have the ability to move them around. And you also have the ability just to hide them. So if there's a field that sometimes you want, sometimes you don't want it, you can just go ahead and hide it versus fields that we completely removed because, yeah, we are never going to want them. So that is how the columns work. There is a grouping function in here. In this case, or this report, it is not grouped at all. But you could, let's say you were trying to look at a particular event. So you grouped it by the title. Or rather, that's going to group it by this title, which would not be useful to me. So sorry, I don't have a good example here, but it can be useful. Sometimes they group things by days as well, if you're looking at transactions from the prior day. And you also have the ability to do data summaries. So also not a good example here, but when there's numbers, especially like an email summary report, if you want to see what's my average open rate, what's my highest open rate, my minimum, max, those data summaries will provide it for you, and it summarizes it in just a nice little box at the bottom of this table. So they've absolutely enhanced just this view here that you can get a lot of data without even exporting it. But of course, you're welcome to do that as well. Oh, important note here, and this tripped me up as well, that you will want to go ahead and update whatever you change here, whether it's a columns, grouping, data summary, or all of the above. I have something on the background of my screen, so I'm not sure if it's messing with updating that or if it did. But my point there being, sometimes I've hit update before and then I just go ahead and exit out and I think it's good to go. So it did go ahead and update it so that you were able to see that information. Be sure after that you hit save again up here. Or those changes will not be saved. So that was an error I did for sure. Oh, fun one. And this is new with the reporting as well. I don't think filters were available before. Far more intuitive as far as where it's shown on your screen. And you are able to go ahead and expand that. And so by default, there are some filters available here, but in the far right corner of that little box, you can edit filters. So if invitee status is not something you want to filter by, they want to do title or something like that, registration type could be relevant. You can turn those on or off, and you can also reorder them similarly to the columns. be sure to apply and of course save after at that point to be sure to save it officially. Once, I know we did this initially, or if you just decided to run the report rather than modifying the data. I do have a note on here that those filters, I know of this, you have a data drop down up here, they set up this report, how they data, set these filters, or if they allow it to be a filter or not, order they put them in as well. If you want to, if you grant that access criteria to a portal user for free, eComm specialist does, they will be able to apply those filters. You can absolutely go ahead and modify it again, go ahead and run it. But useful of course, if you've saved it, finessing those reports can be beneficial to those end users in order to keep those changes. I'm going to hit cancel for now. Just a couple things to think about. There are some other reports, while I don't think they're common, hence why I didn't bring them up at the beginning. There are some other reports in there that I think are often forgotten about. And frankly, a lot of it comes down to, even if we were able to get that data, would we have the capacity to do anything with it? So if you do, these reports might be valuable. So the first one being very similar to open summaries, or those email summaries, actually looking at clicks, taking it a step further on who's clicking into items, and that may or may not be relevant based on what information you're providing in your post-registration emails. Another one is abandoned registrations. So the way we previously used this in my office, sometimes people would fall off that registration process and still show up at the door and think that they had tickets. And if they happen to be on that list, we might still let them in, or being very proactive with that list and following up with all of those individuals and asking them if they want to finish out that registration. Or we've done it in our office where if we see some very important names or somebody who told us they were going to be there, that we know there's going to be some problem later, that we'll go ahead and follow up with them or their assistants. I will also leave you with, I'll share it out on a chat right now, but very much what we covered today. We do have the Cvent reporting wiki out there that has existed for a bit. But if there's anything that you need a refresher on, that's a great resource. And of course, we also have our Cvent Flex, well, just additional resources. So I know not focusing on Flex today or how to build events, but do want to make sure you all have that on your radar, knowing that it has or Classic has a July 1 sunset date as well. Alrighty, I hope to see you on Monday rather, Monday to talk about cross event reports and the portal. And otherwise, thank you so much for spending half an hour with me today. I appreciate it, and have a great day.